My brother and I were waiting around the parking lot to film this car, and we could hear it coming a whole minute before it showed up. We could hear a rumbling in the distance, and we were like, hey, what if that's the car that we're about to film? And we just kept hearing it come closer and closer and closer until it was deafening when it finally showed up. This is a 1999 Porsche 911, also known as the Porsche 996. I don't know why they call it that, that's just the name that Porsche gives it. If anybody wants to tell me why Porsche names all of their cars in the 900s, please let me know. I'm very curious why that happens. Full disclosure, I've never been that big of a Porsche fan, especially of the 911. I think it's because I have a large bias towards aesthetics in cars, and to me, the Porsche has never been a particularly good-looking car. It's always reminded me way too much of a VW Beetle just kind of smushed. And the thing is, the design hasn't really changed, and I mean, it looks old to me. Even the new ones, I think the new ones look good from behind, but overall they just look exactly the same as they did 15 years ago. But I've never driven a 911, and now that I have, I'm starting to change my mind. Now I get it. I get why people like Porsche 911s. I totally get it. They are fast. That goes without saying. But what I notice is it sticks to the ground like nothing else. Now, I thought my Mazda Miata handled pretty well, and I've driven go-karts that handle pretty well, but this thing just plants itself. Granted, I never got too much faster than like 45 miles an hour. It's a weird dichotomy because it feels like it weighs both 1,000 pounds and 1 million pounds, because it can go around a corner so quickly, but it sticks to the ground as if it's really heavy. I don't know if that makes any sense. That's probably a weird way to say it, but basically it has a ton of grip, and I was surprised by how much grip it had. This Porsche is a little bit different. This one has a few modifications, as you can probably tell from the sound. It has a straight pipe exhaust from the headers all the way out. Now that's not very long because it's a rear-engined vehicle, but that straight six makes a vicious sound. And I mean vicious. My ears were literally ringing after driving this car. It is so loud. And is that something I would be able to live with every day? Probably not. I mean, there are some fun parts. You get to piss off the hippies, quote unquote, as the owner said, which is kind of funny. But I couldn't imagine waking up, going to work at 7 a.m. and just hearing grrrr, or whatever the sound is, all the way to work for 30 minutes, then all the way back. I would get yelled at by my parents if I showed up to their house with an exhaust sounding like that. But hey, when I was driving it, I loved every second of it. At no point during the drive did I think this was too loud. I just wanted to give it more and more and more and push it harder and harder. The reason for that might be that it sounds better the higher and higher you get in the revs. Another complaint I've always had about Porsche 911s is that they don't sound very good. The flat six has never really been that appealing of an engine to me, but it's probably because I've never heard it unadulterated. There's always a muffler between the sound and the flat six when I've ever heard it in the past, but when it's completely unfiltered, man is that a great sound. The other reason is probably because I've only heard it in city traffic, where you're barely touching 2,000 RPM, at least here in Ann Arbor. But, man, as soon as this thing gets over 4,000, it just rips at your ears. And I mean that in a good way. Until, of course, you get out and your ears are ringing. In a way, the exhaust is both the best feature and the car's ultimate downfall. At least with this particular model. I mean, would I trade my Miata for this? Absolutely, any day. This thing is awesome. But it probably would bug me after a while. Because, I mean, at first, the exhaust is really the only thing you notice. And it prevents you from enjoying the car because you're so aware of how loud you are. We were driving this Porsche in a private neighborhood near a golf course, and after one drive, someone came up in a golf cart and asked us what we were doing, and politely asked us to shut up. Clearly he was suspicious of us with this ridiculously loud car, and we were probably throwing some people off their game on the course. On a side note, the interior of the car actually felt kind of familiar. The interior is sort of that weird late 90s plasticky but fake leathery kind of feel, which doesn't bother me, but it just felt familiar because it's very similar to my Miata, although obviously much more expensive. Although the Porsche 911 996, that is, isn't that good looking of a car, and it's not very shouty with its looks, the best way to make up for that is just take off the mufflers, get a straight pipe, and then everybody will notice you. I mean, you could be parked next to a Ferrari, which we literally were at the golf course. We were parked by a Ferrari, and no one will take a second glance at that Ferrari if your engine is on. So, with that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Please subscribe, it'll really help me out.